All right, well, welcome back. We're continuing our programming on our 2025 Constitution Day, which celebrates American Cincinnatus, George Washington's constitutional legacy. And this last session, I'm actually really excited about this because we've been working with the Quill Project on a special model. We normally work on constitutional conventions. Quill's worked on treaties, other countries' constitutions, state constitutions. Did you all know, by the way, that Americans had written and ratified 235 state constitutions? Well, we've been doing something special for the last better part of a year and are going to continue doing it for a while. We've been working on the Declaration of Independence, and we have been trying to use the tools that the Quill Project provides to pull apart and make clearer just how we got the text of the Declaration of Independence. Not just the ideas that are in it, but how is that text constructed? It is, after all, probably certainly the most well-known piece of political rhetoric America has ever produced, and possibly our most important statement of our political principles. So in engaging in that project, we have been working alongside, as always, our students and staff, been working alongside our colleagues in Oxford, and I'm going to introduce you today to one of those colleagues. Holly Megson is a senior documentary editor with the Quill Project at Pembroke College and Oxford University. And for all of us who work on these projects, Holly is familiar to us and is just a wonderful colleague to work with. But I'm going to introduce her to you today because she's going to share with you the character of this project that we're undertaking on the Declaration, what it's adding to our knowledge. And I will also say, by way of maybe embarrassing her a little bit, I got to see this presentation given at the Anderson House in Washington, D.C., which is the home of the Society of the Cincinnati, in a wonderful American Revolution conference that was put on earlier this week. And Holly did a phenomenal job there and wowed our colleagues in history and politics who were on hand to see it. So I'm glad that we'll now get to share it with all of you. And please join me in welcoming Holly Megson.
In his own design of his tombstone, Jefferson declared himself the author of the Declaration of Independence. In doing so, he perhaps disregarded one of the most fundamental features of the Revolutionary era, the Republican way of doing government, which is to say, in the tradition of participation, collaboration, and consensus. A more appropriate epitaph, and certainly one that better reflects Jefferson's actual role, might be that of draftsman. Despite Jefferson composing the document which asserted the intention of the colonies to be independent states, this was by no means a one-man endeavor. And although Jefferson may have wanted himself to be immortalized as the author of American liberty, scholars like Pauline Maier are contributing to a growing body of scholarship that better reflects his important but contextualized and balanced role. The Declaration of Independence is among the most studied pieces of political literature in history. Indeed, as a foundational text of the United States of America, the Declaration has received no shortage of historiographical interrogation, though the fascinating process through which it took shape has received far less attention than the philosophies which underpinned it and influenced it, or its role in shaping the development of the world's most renowned system of republican government. For the purposes of this presentation, I wish to confine our focus simply to the drafting process of the Declaration, who wrote it, and the ways it was written. By drafting, I refer not to Hazelton's interpretation, which pertained to the physical location in which the document was written, a room in the lodgings of Jacob Graff in Philadelphia. Instead, I want to refer to the development of the text from early to late June in 1776. This means understanding the contributions and roles of its authors, Jefferson, but also Adams, Franklin, and the Committee of the Whole at large. The draft began with the appointment of the Committee of Five on the 11th of June, subsequent to the passage of Richard Henry Lee's Resolution for Independence. It was decided that the responsibility for crafting the initial draft would fall to Jefferson. Precisely how this was decided is disputed. In 1822, in a letter addressed to Thomas Pickering, Adams recalled the appointment of a subcommittee consisting of himself and Jefferson, in which he stated that Jefferson ought to write. He believed this for 4 reasons. First, Jefferson was from the newly established and influential state of Virginia. Second, as a Southerner, Jefferson was devoid of the revolutionary connotations which enshrouded those from the North. Third, unlike Adams, Jefferson had not openly supported independence in Congress. And finally, Jefferson had what Adams described as a better command of the written word. Conversely, in 1823, Jefferson rebutted this claim, and he argued that he was appointed the draftsman with the unanimous consent of the committee. Now, these discrepant accounts speak to how memory is susceptible to distortion, especially in a context where profound demands were asked of the individuals by Congress on the eve of revolution. By my own review of the journals of the Continental Congress, Jefferson and Adams were appointed to 9 and 12 committees respectively, from the 1st of May to the presentation of the Declaration on the 28th of June. This is not including the Committee of 5. It is no wonder that amid war, revolution, and the birth of a new republic, their recollections are hazy. In the absence of a robust documentary record, Jefferson's account, as the primary author of the Declaration, has often dominated over Adams. And although not a topic for today, how and even why Jefferson came to be the draftsman should solicit a great deal of historical inquiry. Unlike the available documentary record, research exploring the textual development of the Declaration is abundant. Scholars like Becker, Mayer, Boyd, and Hazleton have all certainly contributed to an extensive commentary on the drafting process of the Declaration. Many of them have even offered a variety of approximations of the text to chart the various life stages of the document. But these approximations largely focus on the penultimate draft, that is, the document received by Congress. By using our Quill software, I believe I can offer the first insight into the full secondary or tertiary draft. This is possible because one of the most useful features of the Quill platform is the ability to track the development of a negotiated text over time by displaying track changes via a visual model. This is a recreation only of the secondary draft, or perhaps the tertiary draft, as there is an extant fragment of the original draft, commonly referred to as a composition draft, which is unfortunately incomplete. Now, this fragment can be found in the Library of Congress and consists of a paragraph, a line, and a further paragraph which was written upside down. Obvious in this fragment is Jefferson's frustration with the betrayal of his perceived British brethren for their failure to respond to their grievances and their treatment by the king. Now, Boyd's analysis of this document against a later manuscript copy indicates that this is indeed the first extant copy of the Declaration of Independence. This document takes a significantly different form to that of the final draft, as Congress omitted all but 2 of the original clauses. Excluding this fragment, nothing remains of the so-called original paper, which Jefferson referred to in a letter to James Madison in 1823. Reconstructing an earlier draft is therefore a challenge, but certainly possible. We began first by dissecting the rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. This is a manuscript copy of the document, which includes successive generations of revisions interlaced on the super and subscript lines in the hand of Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin. Post-Revolutionary War, Jefferson chose to annotate this copy by ascribing the various changes to their respective authors. Changes made by Adams were designated by an asterisk, by Franklin, a dagger, and omissions by Congress were enclosed in square brackets. It is possible to strip back this collage of text to produce what we will subsequently call the baseline copy of the rough draft. This copy reproduces the document in its original form, where the layers of revisions have been disregarded to produce a clean copy, that is, devoid of insertions, substitutions, deletions, and grammatical corrections. All grammar and spelling mistakes have been reproduced in this baseline copy, namely Jefferson's misspelling of the word independent with an A, and his use of the contraction IT'(S) in place of the possessive its. From here, I compared this baseline draft, which we were able to create, against the Adams copy. The Adams copy is a near verbatim transcript of the Declaration of Independence, as it read when Adams first received the document from Jefferson. Although admittedly, there are a few minor discrepancies between this version and the baseline copy. Now, excusing the spelling and punctuation discrepancies, we've identified a total of 8 substantive changes between the baseline copy and the Adams copy. In his own analysis, Becker employed a similar method of comparison, with a minor difference. He utilized the Adams copy in conjunction with the rough draft to create the document as it likely read when received by Franklin. This document omits the corrections of Adams and Franklin, meaning that Becker believed that Franklin was the first recipient of the document. This I disagree with. Instead, I favor the interpretation offered by Boyd, that Adams received the document prior to Franklin. This is because Adams copied the words "under absolute power" in the second paragraph. These are words that do not feature in the baseline copy or the final copy, thus proving that this amendment came in 2 halves and, as proven by the handwriting, was enacted by 2 individuals. The term "under absolute" was a change introduced by Jefferson after his initial composition of the draft, but before the document was received by Adams. And the word "power" was inserted by Adams, and in the final copy, it reads "despotism," which was a change by Franklin, thus proving that Adams definitely received the document first, which is also corroborated by the fact that Franklin was suffering from a severe case of gout at the time and was absent from Congress for much of June. Nevertheless, whilst Becker's reproduction was did not intend to outline all of the errors made by Adams, he does signpost some of the inconsistencies he spotted in the footnotes. I unfortunately also contest some of these supposed inconsistencies. First, he claims that in the second paragraph of the Adams draft, that Adams wrote for light or transient causes rather than light and transient causes as it reads in the original. It is evident from consulting the manuscript that this is not correct. Secondly, Becker falsely claims that Adams omitted the letter S from the following words: constitutions, allurements, and rights. Whilst the S on these words is admittedly small, it does match the form of the S employed in the word inhabitants, proving that this was a misunderstanding on Becker's part. Now, this is doubtless the consequence of less advanced technology, and Becker can certainly be excused, having made these claims in 1922. Discrepancies between my interpretation and Becker's aside, I was able to propose the Adams copy, again, excluding spelling and punctuation differences as an amendment to the baseline copy through Quill, enabling me to identify which changes were made when, between the initial composition of the draft and Adams' receipt of the document. In doing so, we identified a total of 9 changes. These are the following. In paragraph 2, the words "sacred and undeniable" were substituted for "self-evident." Again, in paragraph 2, the word "in" was deleted before the words "rights," and we presume that this was a grammatical change that Jefferson made as he was writing that paragraph. The third change is again in paragraph 2, and it's the substitution of the words "subject them to arbitrary power" to "reduce them under absolute power." In paragraph 5, the words "in the legislature" were inserted after the words "the right of representation." In paragraph 7, Jefferson chose to delete an incomplete sentence. Again, we presume that this was a change made as he was directly writing. In the penultimate paragraph, Jefferson also changed the words "glory and happiness" for "happiness and glory." He similarly struck out the words "in a separately state" for the words "apart from them." And he substituted the word "pronounces" for "denounces." And lastly, he substituted the words "everlasting adieu" for "eternal separation." Interestingly, this method also supports a theory presented by Becker and Boyd, which is that Jefferson met with Adams and Franklin on at least 2 occasions. In his post-revolutionary annotations to the rough draft, only 2 amendments were attributed to Adams. First, to strike out the words, His Present Majesty, and replace them with the present King of Great Britain on page 1 of the rough draft. And second, the insertion of the words, after such dissolutions in the 5th grievance clause on page 2 of the rough draft. Notably, the First Amendment concerning the King does not feature in the Adams copy. This absence suggests that this amendment was made at a different time. We can employ the same method of using Quill to the composition draft, the earliest fragment that we have, enabling us to envision the document as it first read. In doing so, we recognize that 21 changes were made by Jefferson to this single fragment, a testament to the extent of deliberation, both internal and external, that went into this document at all stages of its development. The fundamental benefit of the Quill software is that it allows us to recapture the Declaration from as it appears in the National Archives in DC to the first scraps of paper drafted by its authors. There's no doubt that Jefferson wrote the lion's share of the Declaration and should be considered no less central in what it created in the American Republic. However, the drafting of this document was by no means a one-man show, but rather the culmination of collaboration and deliberation, and belongs to a broader tradition of collective authorship, which was common of the Revolutionary-era democratic process. This should certainly be celebrated, not least as it is so hugely appropriate for a document that birthed a nation built on the principle of collective representative government. Ultimately, what I have explored is just a small but important episode in a broader project that looks how the consensus of independence was reached, and the forms of words used to encapsulate the American grievances. This is part of a larger project that we hope to publish in early 2026 ahead of the semi-quintennial anniversary. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to give you folks a chance to ask any questions about this, including Holly now knows everything there is to be known about the creation of the Declaration of Independence. So please fire away if you have any curiosity about what we're working on and how this is unfolding.
I guess while you were looking at this, was there any changes that surprised you specifically, and why?
That is a good question. I think there was no one amendment that I was surprised by the content. I think all of the different stages of revision, be it by Jefferson privately, by Adams, Franklin, the potential Committee of Five, we don't know if the Committee of Five met before it was submitted to Congress, and also the changes made by Congress all seem to make sense. They're all reflective of the individuals that suggested that amendment. For instance, Congress wanted to temper a lot of the language about the king, and that made sense to me. I think what surprised me was just the amount of revision that Jefferson did before it was sent to anyone else, as proven by the composition draft. There was an entirely other piece of paper that we don't have access to, and we have no idea if that was the first one. That's just simply the earliest document that we've found. So yes, I think the extent of deliberation was what surprised me more so than any particular amendment.
What were some of the themes in a lot of the revisions going forward and the way that the rhetoric changed over the over each iteration of the document?
There were several amendments, but I guess we can kind of group them into stylistic amendments. Franklin definitely proposed a lot of stylistic amendments. He wanted to make Jefferson's language snappier, as did many of the members of the Committee of the Whole. But there are also many substantive amendments. Jefferson's paragraph on slavery was famously omitted. So I think it's interesting that there were two. The revision process was both to ensure that the document was as coherent and succinct as it could be, but they were also very conscious that in many ways the document was one of America's first press releases. They were trying to justify why they should be independent, and they were very conscious that they had to do so in a very articulate way.
It might be the new title of the project, America's First Press Release. Actually, I wanted to add one thing on this point. Adams, at least, corresponds with Abigail Adams and talks a little bit about changes in the list of grievances. And he notes that they tried to eliminate those grievances that suggested any kind of personal animosity, and also those that would be insulting to the British people. So you want to keep the criticism aimed solidly at the government. That's sort of, so it is interesting. They're quite sensitive to the way this is going to be received elsewhere. Scott, you had a question?
So what you were able to discover about the sequencing of the drafting process and just the drafting process using Quill, how does that compare to what Mayer was able to, how she understood the sequencing, and then also, I guess, her take relative to Becker and the earlier scholars who worked on it?
Frustratingly for us, we spent a lot of time looking at Mayer's work and trying to dissect what she believed. And she very cleverly doesn't assert a robust or particularly strong argument at any point, which isn't a critique of her work. It's actually very clever how she manages to discuss a declaration at such length without ever asserting a clear chronology. What we speculated is that she defers to Becker and Becker's account when she created her Appendix C, which is her reproduction, similar to what we have done, but she was focusing on what the document looked like before Congress received it. In that, she used much of Becker's own reproduction, and as I said, he speculates that Franklin was the first recipient, and then Adams, so I guess in that way, I definitely differ with her interpretation, but again, she was very clever in focusing her work on the actual drafting of the text rather than the transfer of the text between its various authors, unhelpfully for us.
I have some questions then. I wondered about, there's all this stuff that happens outside of Congress. So, I mean, what do we expect to find coming from outside? I mean, we usually think of a deliberative body of, sort of deliberating internally. Mm-hmm. Individuals come in with their different prejudices and ideas, and they construct the text. But here we've got a lot of stuff flowing toward Congress from outside, state and local committees, and there's even a previous Congress, the First Continental Congress. All sorts of bodies are sending things. So how does all that surrounding stuff help us understand what's in the Declaration, or how might it?
Well, that's actually part of the second phase of the project that we're looking at, which is exploring the local antecedents to the Declaration and if the language of them in any way informed them. Unfortunately, we haven't done a huge amount of work there yet, but I think some of the other influences external to Congress that informed the Declaration were definitely the British Declaration of Rights from the 1600s, Jefferson's own draft of the Virginia Constitution definitely informed much of his work. And then similarly, George Mason's Virginia Bill of Rights was all language that Jefferson, if he didn't directly draw on the text, he definitely drew from their sentiments. And in fact, Jefferson borrowed the list of grievance style format that was present in the English Declaration of Rights. So there are very clear ancestors, as it were, to this document.
Any final questions? Project? Well, if not, well, please join me in thanking Holly for. And I will mention in closing that, these kinds of projects, like the Declaration project that we're engaged in, they're an important focal point for us. It is the case that a lot of our academic disciplines and a lot of our energy and resources within higher education and academia have not really been aimed at the American founding for a very long time. And it's a very encouraging thing that I think with the 250th anniversary approaching, we're reminded of the need to reinvigorate an examination of our founding, partly because we've inherited it. We often like to talk about the American founding as a pre-partisan inheritance. The political principles that we shaped and the institutions that we created predate our political parties. And they really do form a pre-partisan foundation for American politics that we can, from every side of the political aisle, appeal to and utilize to try to convince our fellow citizens of what is best for us as a country. And so it's very important in that regard, but it's also critical because we can learn from it. Because we've inherited not just the material, the product of the American founding, but hopefully we've inherited a set of civic virtues, political practices, and political institutions that we can employ skillfully and virtuously in the furtherance of our own good as citizens and for the good of our country. So this is an opportunity for us to lead the way in doing that. And that's what the Center for Constitutional Studies is determined to do as we approach this important anniversary. So thank you for joining us for this, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.